Good afternoon to each and everyone. We are the Group 6 and we are the third presenter. The IP group that we are going to report today is Manobo and Bagobo. The contents of our report is here. Location, geography, worldview, and under the worldview, here are their belief system, view about land and resources, myths that explain aspects of their life, marriage and death practices, and their rituals. Next is material culture, social organization, historical events and important events to the IP groups, and issues confronting the IP groups. So, let's start. First is their location or their map. The Manobo is here at the side, yung mga may red marks dyan. They were primarily located around northern Mindanao, central Mindanao or tinatawag din nating Soxargen, and Caraga regions. Some Manobo can be located as far as the southern peninsula of Davao Oriental. Most of them were living at Davao Occidental and coastal areas of Sultan Kudarat. So, ito yung mga Manobo, yung mga may red marks po dyan. Next is the map of Bagobo. Same as the Manobo, yung may red marks din dyan. Doon natin matatagpuan ang Bagobo. Bagobo IP group was located or traditionally lived in the east and south of Mount Apo and the eastern side of Cotabato. But presently most of the Bagobo are scattered in the interior ranges beyond Davao City. So, ayan. Ayan ang kanilang map. Ang Manobo at ang Bagobo. Next naman is yung geography.
Everyone, I am Erica Laikamifi Danes, so I'm going to discuss to you about the geography, belief systems, or supernatural of the Manobo and the Bagobo. Manobo is a generic term which refers to the people who are still in the subsistence level economy and are generally in the mountains and who practice the slash and burn agriculture. Further, she qualified that the term Manobo is very derogatory, for it connotes to be backward, uncivilized, ignorant, boisterous, unwashed, unkept, rough, and lawless. Most Manobo inhabit the river valleys, hillside, plateaus, and interiors of Agusan, Bukidnon, Cotabato, Davao, Misamis Oriental, and Surigao del Sur. The 8 groups of Manobo are the Cotabato Manobo, Agusan Manobo, Matig Salog Manobo, Obo Manobo, Dibabawon Manobo, Sarangani Manobo, Manobo of Western Bukidnon, and Tagabawa Manobo. The Manobo is described sometimes according to their political or landform division. Manobo living in Sarangani province can be called as Sarangani Manobo, as well as those who are near the Agusan River can be called as Agusan Manobo. Bagobo. The mountainous region between the Upper Polangi and Davao River is the homeland of the upland Bagobo. The coastal Bagobo once lived in the hills south and east of Mount Apo, where according a legend, their supreme god and common ancestor Apo Sandawa ruled as god. Mount Apo is the Bagobo ancestral domain and their sacred place of worship. The Bagobo are by origin a nomadic tribe. They traveled from one place to the other by hacking their way through the virgin forests. Apo means grandfather of all mountains and is the highest mountain peak in the Philippines. The land was also cultivated with various crops but left behind after harvest time in search of a better place to cultivate. The Bagobo constitute one of the largest group among the indigenous peoples of southern Mindanao. They are composed of 3 subgroups, namely the Tagabawa, Daklata or Giangan, and the Obo. Although they belong to one social-linguistic group, Bagobo, they also differ in some ways such as dialects, dance steps, costume, and their color preferences, to mention a few. They are referred to as ethnic because they are the people whose distinctive identity is rooted in history. So let's proceed to the belief system or supernatural of the Manobo. The Manobo beliefs consist primarily on an innumerable number of deities or the god or goddesses called Umli, and of secondary deities called Diwata or Diwata. In contrast to these is a multitude of demons known as Busao, waging incessant and ruthless war against the Manobo world. In addition to this, there is a numerous array of spirits known as Tagbanwa, to whom is assigned the ownership of the forest, hills, and valleys, while the various other divisions and operations of nature are thought to be under the superintendence of the other preternatural beings, beneficent or otherwise. The conception which the Manobo has of supernatural world is very much like his idea of the world in which he lives. His gods, like his warrior chiefs, did not recognize sovereignty over the others. We find no idea of supreme being, and the priests of one settlement have their own special deities to whom they and their relatives have recourse. Bagobo. The inhabitants in the early settlements feared the Anitos spirit, which include deceased ancestor and nature spirits or diwatas, who could grant their desire through offering of sacrifices. The religion is an array of innumerable gimokods or spirits who have to be shown respect. The Bagobo also believe in supreme being who inhabits the sky world, as well as a deity, a supernatural immortal being who will bring sickness and death to incestuous couples. The principal spirit is the great creator named Yugpamolak, Manobo, or Manama. That's all. Thank you.
Good morning. So let's talk about view about land and resources. The Manobo, the island of Mindanao, dubbed as the land of promise, is home to more than half of natural and mineral resources in the country. It hosts the largest rubber, banana, and pineapple plantations as well as huge mining explorations. These big agri-plantations and mining corporations encroach peasants communities and indigenous peoples or lumads in Bukidnon, South Cotabato, Sarangani, Compostela Valley, and Davao provinces. Around 500,000 hectares of land in the five regions of Mindanao are planted with crop primarily for export. The Bagobo, still people of the mountains of Mindanao, between the crest of the range which culminates in the volcanic Mount Apu, the highest peak in the Philippines, and the waters at the western side of the head of the Gulf of Davao. For their resources, the Bagobo are a settled people practicing agricultural as well as hunting and fishing. Their chief crop is rice, which they grow in clearing on the mountain sides. Myths that explain aspects of their life. Manobo. The primary Diwata are a class of supernatural beings that dwell in the upper heavens. It is generally believed that one time they led a human existence in Manobo land but finally built themselves a stone structure up into the sky and became transformed into divinities of the first order. They still retain a fondness of tribesmen who live on earth and select certain men and women for their favored friends, or they call it by land or spiritual leader. Bagobo, Atuglay, the old man of Bagobo myth, and Taglibong, the old women were the Mona, who lived on earth before time began. Tradition says that they were acquainted with only the rudest of Bagobo arts and industries, that they were very poor and dressed themselves in a soft shell torn from coconut trees.
Marriage and death practices. Manobo. When death occurs, Lapui death messengers are sent to inform relatives and friends. The body is washed, dressed in best clothes of the deceased, laid on mat at the exact center of the floor directly underneath the peak of the rooftop, and completely covered with a blanket. Objects such as a bolo sword the dead must take with it on its journey to the afterlife are placed near the body. A clothesline is stung parallel to the body, and the clothes of the family or the dead person's personal possessions are hung there. There is much wailing and shouting, and the agong or gong is constantly beaten to announce the death to everyone within the hearing distance. The number of beats indicates the dead person's age, status, and social position. Manobo. Marriage is traditionally by parental arrangement, which begins when each of the two families chooses a spokesperson, preferably a datu or bai, who is known for eloquence and knowledge of custom law. Marriage is an alliance system in which reciprocity and mutual obligation between the groom's and the bride's kinship groups are expected. It is therefore a means of maintaining peace and order, for the Manobo's practice of relation does not extend to one's kindred or allies. Marriage and death practices. The Bagobos bury their dead in carved coffins in the shape of a crocodile. They believe that this reptile protects the corpses from flesh-eating ghouls. During ordinary burials, they cover the corpse with cloth strips arranged in crocodile pattern. They lay mats at the bottom of the grave beneath the coffin. Sometimes they just leave the body in the house and abandon it. They also offer products like rice, coffee, areca nuts, and buyo leaves to the dead for their journey. Bagobo, touching foreheads by the bride and groom, under the guidance and blessing of the wedding solemnizer, is the symbol of marriage in Bagobo culture. Vision of the future is processed by the brain's frontal cortex, situated in the forehead. Joining each other's forehead is an act of union towards the future. Rituals. Manobo. The Samayaan is a native ritual in which omens are read in connection with the various stages of the farming cycle: clearing, planting, growing, and harvesting. The first day of the planting season marks the beginning of the Manobo year. The last day of harvesting is the ending. The Bagobo are a settled people practicing agriculture as well as hunting and fishing. Their chief crop is rice, which they grow in clearings on the mountainsides. Since this grain is their staple food, the whole routine of its cultivation is most closely bound up with their religious beliefs and practices. When in December Orion appears in the sky, this is the signal for the celebration of the great yearly sacrifice and for making all things ready for the rice planting. Offerings of rice cooked in bamboo tubes, pots must not be used for this purpose, are made at the smith's forge, to which the men bring their working knives and other tools used in connection with the cultivation or clearing of the fields.
Material culture. The Manobo language are a group of language spoken in the Philippines. Their speakers are primarily located around northern Mindanao, central Mindanao, and presently called Southern and Caraga regions, where they are natively spoken. Some outlying groups makes Manobo geographical discontiguous as their speaker can be located as far as the southern peninsula of Davao Oriental, most of Davao Occidental and coastal areas of Sultan Kudarat. The Cagayan speaker are the most extremely remote and can be found in certain portions of Palawan. Their dialect is the Saday. Bagobo Klata, also known as Klata, Giangan, Bagobo, and Jangan, is an Austronesian language of southern Philippines. It is spoken on the eastern slope of Mount Apo in Davao del Sur province as well in Davao City, an area stretching from Catalunan to Calinan. The Nervi-Tambangwa language is also known as Bagobo and is not be confused with Giangan. Hindi lahat ng material culture ay bagay na nahawakan nila or natin. Nakapaloob din dito ang language. Wala po kaming mahanap na mga bagay na kanilang ginagamit sa kanilang kultura. Kaya po ang nilagay na lang po namin is yung language nila kasi ito po ay nakapaloob din sa kanilang material culture. Manobo. Ang Manobo ay maraming pangkat ng mga tao na naninirahan sa isa ng Pilipinas. Sila ay nagsasalita lamang ng isang wika, ngunit sila pa ay may ibang wika gaya na lamang ng binukod, dibabawan at matigasog. Bagobo. Isa ang mabobo sa matatatag na tao, sila ay nagsasanay ng agrikultura pati na rin ang mga pangangaso. Sila din ay may iba't ibang wika, isa na dito ang Tambangwa language at Giangan language. Ang Klata din ay karaniwang naiuri bilang isa sa mga wikang Timog Mindanao.
Social organization. The traditional social structure consists of 4 classes: the Bagani, the Bailan, more common man, and slave. The Bagani class gone now defended the community and when fight. The Bailan, which can still be found, is a male or female, priest or physician. Sabi po dyan, ang tradisyonal na strukturang panlipunan ay binubuo ng 4 na klase: ang Bagani, ang Bailan, mas karaniwang tao at alipin. Ang klase ng Bagani wala na ngayon. Ipinagtanggol ang pamayanan at napunta labanan ang Bailan. Na mahahanap pa rin ay isang lalaki o babaeng pare at manggagamot. Ang mga karaniwang tao ay ang mga magsasaka at mga alipin na kinukuha sa pagsalakay ay pag-aari ng pinuno. At karaniwang binibigay daw ito bilang bahagi ng bride wealth. Ang ibig sabihin po ng bride wealth ay tinatawag din siya na presyo ng ikakasal o bayad sa kasal. Tapos next, village member can also become slaves if they cannot pay the fine for a crime they committed, such as theft, destruction of property, adultery, or verbal offense. Slaves, however, may with their freedom by diligence in the discharge of their duties. So, sabi po dyan, ang mga miyembro ngayon ay maaari ding maging alipin kung hindi nila mababayaran ang mga multa para sa krimen na kanilang nakagawa, tulad ng pagnanakaw, pagkasira ng pag-aari, pangangalunya o pagdiwang, pagkakasala. The next, traditionally Bagobo society was dominated by a warrior class called Magani, who include the leader of the community, usually a dato, who had no real power of their than his influence as senior arbiter and judge. Characteristics derived from this being Magani. Sabi po dyan, ayon sa kaugalian, ang lipunang Bagobo ay pinangungunahan ng isang mandirigmang klase na tinatawag na magani o, o na kasama ng pinuno ng pamayanan. Karaniwang isang dato na walang tunay na kapangyarihan. Maliban sa kanyang impluwensya bilang nakatatandang arbiter at hukom, mga katangian na nagmula sa kanyang pagiging magani. And next,
Sungod Tikamanga, a unique festival of custom and tradition of the Manobo tribes. The original settler of this town marks another milestone in cultural history after successfully showcasing its 3-day ethnic activities. It is an annual gathering where different rituals depicted by Manobos or Polanggion impresses the uniqueness of their culture. It is an annual gathering where different rituals depicted by Manobos or Polanggion impresses the uniqueness of their culture. Set every mid-February. The Manobos of Quezon in Bukidnon gather together for a grand Thanksgiving celebration. Particularly, it unites all the Manobo, Polanggion, the Matigsalug, and a few other smaller Manobo communities in 2-day fiesta. In the Manobo language, Sungod Tikamanga means to prepare the tools for the new farming season. It is also means a whole lot more with the full lineup of activities that showcase their arts, culture, and tradition. Bagobo, prayers and offerings to Manama and to the food spirit Taragomi precede the actual commencement of planting operation. The rice planter consists of a long shaft to one end of which is attached a narrow iron blade. The other end having fastened to it a clapper of split bamboo. The men make a shallow holes in the ground with these implements, the women following and dropping into the holes the seed, over which they scrape the loosened soil with their feet. The purpose of the clappers is obscure. Perhaps they're intended to frighten away ill-disposed spirits, or it may be that the noise made by them as the planters strike the ground is pleasing to the guardian spirit of the field.
Next is issues comforting the IP groups. Manobo, having a land issue. Manobo have contact with the lowland peoples around them. Their location in the highlands prevented their subordination to any of the dominant peoples of the Philippines until the late 19th century. By this time, the Manobo groups have begun to be incorporated heavily into global economic system. This was especially so as logging companies and settlers move into their areas after mid-century, making it increasingly difficult for Manobo farmers to retain sufficient land to making a living. While the Manobo peoples continue today to be socially structured along kinship lanes and to practice a predominantly subsistence economy, drastic acculturative changes have occurred in the last quarter century. They are now producing limited surplus, which they sell to buy items from the market. Thus, their efforts remain mainly in subsistence rather than the accumulation of wealth. The next one is Bagobo. The fight for a central domain, the Bagobo Kulata or Giangan, tribe of Barangay Manuel Ginga, Tokpo District, Davao City is the one of indigenous peoples or IP, identified by our DABAR founded project, documentation of indigenous knowledge for climate change adaptation as a wellspring of sustainable agricultural practices. A big portion of a central domain of the Bagobo Kalata was fenced off and claimed by a religious sect known as the Kingdom of Jesus Christ. The name above every name, INC, a Philippine-based restorationist church, founded and led by Apollo Kubuloy. The set started its incursion into the Bagobo a central domain in 2000 when it built a mansion with a landscape garden for tourists. On the other hand, the entry of Samipro, the large-scale banana plantation, added yet another threat of the Bagobo lands. The encroachment left most of the Bagobo farmers landless. They have no choice but to work as farmer laborers in the plantation. Adding insult to injury, the community members who have already lost their lands were also losing their once environmental stable and healthy lives. They are continuously exposed to aerial spraying of pesticide, which they believe are the cause of their constant headaches. Some say that the pesticides are the roots of the recent pregnancy miscarriages in the community.
At doon na po nagtatapos ang aming report. Maraming salamat po sa pakikinig. Again, we are the Group 6 and we are the third presenter. Thank you.